Here's a new concept for leaders to think about: embracing radical transparency. That is, openly and transparently sharing financial information, decision making, and being really honest about challenges with the wider teams. Whoa. So many thoughts about that. Hello, I'm Nikki. I've been in leadership for over 17 years, going from leading just 2 teams to over 300 in multiple locations and leading leaders. And I am very keen to shake things up in terms of my leadership strategies. So let's jump into this idea of transparent leadership. This is an idea that really embraces being open and honest and genuine with your team. While we talk about that a lot in leadership, this is more about, okay, here's our financial information. Here's our strategy document and how we came to those decisions that we made within that. This approach aims to build trust, collaboration, and a culture of accountability within an organization. Now, I definitely want a team that has a culture of trust and honesty and openness, but I know that sharing a lot of information can sometimes create a bit of an instability if it's shared without the context. So how would you do this in a way that was appropriate or valuable? Let's explore. It starts with, number 1, open communication. This will not be a big shocker to many of you, but the idea around this is openly sharing the full communication. So openly sharing about the performance of the organization or the real performance of the team, and not just the wins and success, which is quite easy to share and is often very valuable, but also the things that haven't gone as well, and maybe where you haven't achieved those markers of success or your KPIs. I really like this approach because I do deeply believe that people will trust you as a leader if you're open and honest, and this builds into that philosophy. How you do this in practice, though, could be a challenge because it would require you to regularly update the team on things that are happening. So that could be through emails or it could be on an open communication page. However, it's all very well sharing all this information. If people don't understand it or don't know how to read it, or your team ends up spending all their time reading your 45-page strategy or financial documents, you're probably not getting the best value out of being open and sharing that information. There are strategies to foster open communication through regular emails or newsletters or an online page that everybody has access internally where highlights are shared. I think this is common practice for a lot of teams, but this would really be about sharing openly not just the wins and not just the successes, but also the challenges that have come along with those wins and maybe what's been sacrificed in the process of getting to those wins, and doing that in a way so that the team can easily digest it and it's more impactful. Sometimes as leaders, we put ourselves in the position of being the energizer or always having positive energy for the team to uplift, even in times of real challenge. So this would be more about putting in place, okay, yes, we have got positive things happening, but also we know that this was something that we didn't achieve, and we're going to share with you why we didn't quite make that KPI or why what we were rolling out for that system wasn't successful, in a way that people can understand without having to get too deep into the detail. I think if this is done well, this could actually be really positive, because sometimes it feels like a bit of a veneer if we're always talking about the positives and the wins and what we've been successful with, which most people will know realistically there were things that we didn't achieve or things that we talked about in the previous quarter that maybe didn't quite come through. And instead of just skipping over that, it would be about acknowledging that and talking about, hey, we didn't achieve this because we decided to prioritize that. And the reason we prioritized that was this. And just making it more transparent for the team to understand. In my view, this would be really positive. However, I would also be quite cautious around this approach and being really careful about what is shared in an open way and how that lands with people. While I think this could be a really positive approach if it's done in the right way, I wouldn't take this as being a complete relax. Let's just tell everybody everything. Let's keep all things open discussions everywhere. I think you would have to manage this quite carefully and be really purposeful about the communication. Number 2 is around accessible information. This is making available relevant information to stakeholders, all the teams, and sometimes even the public. This could include financial statements, meeting notes, and strategic plans. But how would you do this? you'd probably need a really good system in place, such as a shared portal or somewhere that the team all know that they can go to that is updated regularly. And it wouldn't be just about keeping that updated, it's also about ensuring that people actually know to go there and look at it. So when it's updated, a message is also sent out so people know to go there and have a look at whatever it is that has been put up there for your viewing. I often find myself sharing for documents or communications, so it could also be really helpful to have a search option so that employees could look for information if there was something from 6 months ago that they kind of remembered but couldn't remember what was in it, and then they can easily find that information. Because being transparent is also meaning that people can actually go and find things themselves. They don't just have to ask for it, they can be self-directed to get it. The other component to this is risk. You can provide all of these documents and all of this information openly, and depending on what kind of organisation you are, that could be just amongst your team, but if it's the public, that is something that would have to be really carefully managed. If it's just amongst your team, you also need to take responsibility for interpreting that. So actually helping them understand what that information is about. And this could be that there's just a summary highlights page at the front. So if it's a financial document, this is the main points, this is the graph, this is, whatever it is to help people summarize it themselves and quickly see it and not have to read a 100-page document to get the same information. You also need to be prepared for wider sharing and the consequences of that. So whatever you choose to put out there, it could potentially go wider than what you were intending. So you have to be ready for that. You may have to put in place training or a session around what the purpose of the information sharing is about, because it's all very well making it available. I would want to be quite purposeful about, okay, we're sharing this information with you because we want you to feel involved in what decisions are being made. However, there are risks around this and we want you to understand what's being shared. And we also have mechanisms in place that require you not to share it wider than our organisation, for example. So there will be things that need to be put in place to ensure that you can share it safely. Number 3 is decision-making transparency. This is about being really clear how big decisions were made. So there's a couple of ways you can do this. If they're small and easy decisions, it could be that you just provide a bit of an explanation or briefing on that. But if they're quite big and impactful decisions, you could have a decision tree. So that's like a flow chart which shows people, okay, this is the problem that we started with that required us to make some decisions around what we're going to do to resolve it. This is who we included in that process and at what points of the process that they inputted their feedback. You probably also want to say why those stakeholders were consulted with and what value they provided to making that decision. I know from my experience that whenever an unpopular decision has been made, often the first question that I hear is, well, who made that decision? So it's trying to answer that before that question gets asked. It's, okay, this is the problem, this is why we involved these people, this is what value they provided to the decision, and this is the outcome that we got to. I would also like to see the trade-offs. So that is, we made this decision here, but in making this decision, we decided that we weren't going to do X. So we've decided to purchase a big piece of software for the company, which is going to increase productivity and X, Y, and Z. And because of this, we decided that we weren't going to support international conference attendance for this year. Now, we are going to make available a local conference that you can attend, so you're still getting your professional development, but that was the trade-off that we made so that we could move forward in our process with this. So obviously that would be quite an unpopular decision depending on your organisation, but it is making sure that people understand it. I really like this one. I like that it's quite easy to do, it's easy to make people feel included, and it also potentially could set up some really good structure around how you make decisions in your leadership role, which is helpful for future decisions. And I also think it has the potential to provide you with more employee buy-in, because if people understand how decisions are made, then perhaps they know how to input on decisions for future opportunities. Number 4 in leadership transparency is feedback and input. So this is around making it really easy for people to provide feedback and provide some form of collaboration on what's happening within your organisation or within your team. To put this in place, you probably need some channels of communication, so a structure in place around how you will communicate, somewhere for people to be able to send in feedback. So it depends how big you are. It could be, if you're a really small team, that you can have sessions. So every fortnight is a feedback session where you could set up some informal catch up where people can provide feedback in a group, or it could be that you do opportunities for one-on-one. It really depends on how your team is set up. It may also be important to think about how comfortable people are about speaking up. So it could be that a group feedback session doesn't work and some people don't want to be attached to their feedback. I quite like the idea of having the opportunity where people can provide feedback, but it's anonymized so that they're not identified, and you have the opportunity to probably get a little bit more in-depth knowledge about what people are really thinking. I think another way to encourage feedback is to be less formal about it and be quite visible as a leader. So as much as you can be, being a visible leader so that people feel like they've seen you often enough that they're comfortable in approaching you and telling you things. Or you could schedule in your calendar that on Tuesday afternoons you always do a walk round of everybody if they're all in one location, and you ask them how things are going and you ask specific questions. I think it's important to ask a specific question because then people will be able to give you something that is related to that. It's quite hard to give general feedback to somebody verbally on the spot. So if I went up to somebody and I said, "So how's everything going? How are you feeling about the organisation?" No, I'm not going to get anything. I think if you can ask something really specific about something new that's been put in place, or a new team that they've maybe joined, or a new leader, maybe not that. I think it's just establishing and normalizing the fact that you're asking the questions. And then if you do lead leaders, getting them to operate in that way too, so that people feel really comfortable providing feedback no matter where they are in the organisation. Role modelling how you receive that feedback is really important too. So sometimes you're going to hear things, or I've definitely heard things that I didn't particularly like or made me feel a little bit, oh, I didn't know you thought that, which is fine. And I think that's probably the best kind of feedback, because the feedback that kind of grates a little usually has an element of truth. So it's important to be ready for this. So I'll quite often sort of set myself up where I know I'm going to ask people for some feedback, and I'm ready to receive it and be open and not be defensive and listen to what people are saying. I also take care to note it down and then close the loop on it. So if it's something really great and we're going to implement it, definitely giving credit to that person for that idea. But also if it's not something that you're able to implement, it's going back and saying, hey, really liked that you gave us this feedback, really appreciate it, just wanted to let you know that we're not going to be able to adopt it because of this, and giving them a really clear explanation why, because it's important to make them realize that they're not just throwing their ideas into a vacuum. There's somebody's considering them, and you're actually closing that loop for people. I think how you respond to the feedback too is really important, because you want to foster a culture that feels, I want to foster a culture that feels really inclusive and non-judgmental. So if somebody comes up with an idea, you don't want them to feel like they might get shut down or feel a bit stupid for saying something because it's actually already been put in place previously. Number 5 in radical transparency is being really honest, and this kind of loops into that feedback stuff, but being really honest about performance. So I think it's really important to celebrate the wins that you have as an individual performing in your role, but I also think you really need that crucial feedback about things that aren't going so well for you and what you can do to make improvements so that it's better. Providing honest and constructive feedback for teams is quite challenging for leaders, and it can be a difficult conversation. I personally have found that trying to align my feedback as closely to a situation as I can is quite important. So that really requires you to be quite careful about what it is that you think is important to feed back on. I don't want to be feeding back on the little things that I've only noticed one time and they weren't significant. I really only want to feed back on those things that are either repeating over time, so they're providing an opportunity for someone to actually make an improvement, or obviously a really major thing is like you have to just deal with that in the moment. It's very important to be as closely connected to that as you can, but that's a whole nother video. But I think in terms of being really transparent and honest about performance and managing performance, it's making a call on what is the important stuff that I need to feed back to this individual that's going to help them develop and grow in their role, and not forgetting the wins as well. But also, you can't continuously feedback on the stuff that they're not doing well, or continuously feedback on all the little things that they're doing great. So it's trying to be a little bit selective about, okay, I'm going to pick this, and this is something I've seen repeatedly and it's a bit of a problem. Let's nip it in the bud and let's have a discussion and be really honest about it and why it's a problem, and having those discussions really openly with your team. And for the wins, if it's something significant that you haven't seen them do before and you want them to continue doing in their role, then of course by all means acknowledge it and say, look, that was great, I really want to see more of that, what else can you show me? That's really great for people, and they need to hear those things so that they know they're on the right track. But if you keep celebrating every day the little things that they're doing that are actually just doing their role well, then it kind of loses a bit of its shine. And you don't want to be micromanaging behaviours. You just want to keep them on the right track, engaged and energised to do their role. Feedback done the right way and with consistency really lands in that accountability space as well. It means that people are actually being held accountable for things that they're doing. And I think if you're doing this in your team, people will appreciate it and it will help with performance across the whole team. Number 7 in radical transparency and leadership is crisis management transparency. So this will really depend on what kind of leadership role you have and what kind of organisation you work within. But even if it is a small crisis on the scale of things, I do think this is an interesting point. This would be around acknowledging, hey, this is a situation that's occurred, and being really open about that across everybody, and then talking about what steps are being taken to address it. So sometimes I think it can be that a crisis is definitely occurring. People are talking that, oh, have you heard about this? I think that's happening at the moment. Whoa, do you think the whole system's going to go down? So rather than letting that kind of sift through everybody and creating a sense of unease, I do like the idea of being really transparent and just straight away saying, hey, this is happening, this is the team we've got wrapped around that situation. And usually when I've been involved in crisis management, there is a team that is wrapped around it. That team is dealing with it and they're isolated into a set group of people, and that team is also responsible for communicating or implementing anything that needs to happen out of that. They then provide regular updates to the team on what's happening and are really transparent around the fact that, yep, we have this issue, but this is what we're doing, these are the next steps, and this is when we'll share with you what's happening next. And I think done well, that is a really good part of transparent leadership, and I really like that idea. The other factor to consider with that is external stakeholders or agencies that may be connected with you, because if you're having a crisis within your team or within the group, that could impact the service that you provide, or could just be something that they hear about through another mode of communication. It could be quite important that they are then informed really quickly. Say, look, this is what we're doing, this is the situation, this is what you might see, this is what you might hear, but we're going to communicate with you, and if you have concerns, you come straight to us and we'll handle it. Crisis management transparency is not just about providing information, it's actually providing that assurance to people that yes, this is happening, but we've got it under control. And I think using that strategy can create a sense of calm and confidence in what's been done to deal with it. Radical transparency in leadership can have lots of benefits, and we've talked about ways in which you could implement radical transparency in leadership. I think there is opportunity there for it to promote a sense of trust and collaboration with the team. However, I do think there's a real element of risk with radical transparency. I think I'd be really cautious around applying it, releasing all documents and statements. I think there's risk in that, and I personally don't know how that would work exactly. I think leaders who adopt radical transparency have to be really skilled at communication. I can see myself taking away some of these points around transparency and leadership that could work really well, and I can see radical transparency really working in terms of how we communicate and that feedback loop. I really like the idea of people getting more insight into how decisions are made and being really transparent about why that decision was made and what the trade-offs were in making that decision. I do think, however, I would want to put in place some really careful structure so that I didn't end up in that continuous feedback loop. What do you think about that? Do you think that radical transparent leadership would work for you? Thanks for watching and hope to see you in the next one.